everybody, it's Jedimanda for another sewing video for the week. Like I said last week, this is the month of May, so the whole videos from this month will be about patterning. This week, I'm going to teach you guys how to read one of these things. And when I say read, I'm going to tell you how to find your size, how to read the instructions appropriately, and how to read the patterns themselves, like all the little marks and bits that's on the paper. So let's go to my cutting table and look at the patterns. Now, to get started with any pattern making or pattern reading or anything, you're going to need a lot of space, so make sure you clean off and have a nice clean table. The first thing you're going to want to notice when picking out a pattern are the sizes. The sizes are typically in the top right-hand corner of all the patterns, typically. Usually patterns, when you buy them, come in two different sets. They come in a set that is a smaller size to a mid-size, and then sometimes they come in a plus-size set. So that describes which type of pattern package that you buy. This one is the Butterick 36.99 vintage pattern. It's quite gorgeous, and I chose this one because I haven't used it yet, so it's not cut out yet of the paper. But this is the size A5, and it sizes dress sizes between 6 and 14. If you flip it over to the back and you look at the top flap, right here is where you're going to find your comparable size measurements to the sizes of this dress itself. Within this dress, it includes the bust, hip, and waist measurement. Now, when you are making your patterns or making your own garments, guys, be real with yourself and measure yourself and understand your sizes. Because the worst thing is vanity sizes and all of us trying to think that we know a size, or the company's trying to push a different size on us, or whatever. But knowing your actual size will 100% help you when finding patterns. And when I say knowing your size, that's knowing your bust, waist, and hip measurements. Those are the three main sizes you want to know when finding patterns. Like most people today, we're all not one size. So you're going to actually find that your bust, waist, and hip measurement does not correlate with a size, dress size on the pattern. Or if it does, congratulations. Typically what happens with me, I have a bigger hip size than the majority of sizes comparable to my bust and hip. I will always go the biggest size possible when I am cutting out a pattern because it's much easier to size down than to add to a fabric or a pattern. So if out of these measurements, my hip measurement is the biggest within the dress sizes available, I will make that dress size and then taper in and alter the bust and waist measurement to me when I'm making it. So be honest with yourself, it's okay, it's just you and the pattern making this lovely garment that you want to make and show off to everybody. Once you've figured out your dress size, flip it over to the back and read the description of what you're buying. The description at the top will detail exactly the style of dress or garment that you're making. It will give you fabric suggestions, which I specifically say you want to pay attention to, because trust me on that. When you're making something that is designed for a different fabric than you're using, you will not come out with the same look of what you bought. I promise you 100%. If you keep going down the list on the back side of the envelope, you will come across how much fabric you need for your outfit depending on your dress size. Now typically most bolts are 45 inches unless specified. A lot of fabric, fashion fabric and bridal gowns and stuff that's a little more expensive most likely is on a 60 width bolt. So when you're going to your fabric store, check out the size on the bolt and it will tell you 45 or 60, and that will adhere to whatever yardage you need to buy of that certain fabric. And that's all within the contrast or the costume or anything that it specifically says back here of fabric you need to buy. If you keep scrolling down, you'll see notions. It gives you suggestions on which notions you need. For this one, I need hook and eyes and snaps. And then it also gives you finished garment measurements in case you need to know the lower back edge and the back length from base of the neck. More measurements on yourself to help you define which dress size you need. And on the other side, the pattern, everything is in French or Spanish. So that's basic what the envelope will tell you. Now if we go to the instructions, let's talk about what the instructions tell you pretty quick. When you buy a pattern, most of the time the instructions will come in two separate newspaper-like pieces. Typically page 1 will tell you how many pieces you are using, the numbers on the pieces, another body measurement chart. It'll give you fabric cutting and layout suggestions. Now I don't necessarily use them because I cut everything out myself and it's okay, but it's really handy if you're really trying to watch your costs on the fabric to pay attention to the layout suggestions. If you go to the spot that usually says fabric cutting layouts, it'll go into definitions of words that you will see on your pattern pieces, like grain line and fold and other words such as interfacing and all kinds of yada yada. Up here is a very specific diagram you want to pay attention to. This will tell you when you're reading your instructions which sides you are staring at on your instructions. And it will say right side of the pattern, wrong side of the pattern, right side of fabric, and wrong side of the fabric. Those are specific ones you need to pay attention to, especially if you have different sides to your fabric. Pay attention to that, guys. After the layout suggestions, it comes to sewing information, another illustration key on how to read the instructions, like the right side, wrong side, interfacing, lining, and underlining, because these are images that you will see in your instructions. Also, tips on when you're pressing your garment and how to notch and trim certain corners. And also gives you a glossary of terms that you'll use within your pattern. So this really takes you from a basic level to whatever level of sewing you're at right now, so it's not like you have to look everything up. And then it gets into the instructions, and those are typically on the back and front of all the pages that you get. Now let's move to the paper itself. I absolutely hate this paper, mainly because it's just so gigantic and cumbersome, but we'll go ahead and open it up and see if we can find a small piece to work with first. Okay, I found the Bodice Front. This is one that we will break down the symbols and specific spots you see on the pattern paper versus what the rest of the pattern says, because honestly every piece is different, so there are a lot of different terms on them, but usually bodices have the largest amount of terms and notches and just here and there things you need to pay attention to. First, let's talk about notches and spots that make patterns meet up. That's another word for a notch. On every pattern, you will have little triangles along the edges. What this means is that this spot hooks up to another piece of pattern that you will want to mark. When you are cutting out your fabric, you can use chalk or a very simple graphite mark to mark on your fabric, because when you're putting these pieces together, this is a spot you need to align first and then the rest of the edge of the fabric. These are ideal. You do not want to not transfer these marks onto your pattern because onto your fabric, because the fabrics are not going to meet up, they're going to shift, it's not going to look right, it's not going to hang right. You want to make sure that you transfer these marks onto your fabric, as well as other marks like these that you want to make sure you also carry the marks over to. And these are size specific notches. Like I said, it goes from 6 to 14 on this dress pattern, so you're going to want to mark the dress size that you have per every notch that you decide to select. Like if I was doing a 14, I'm going to want to, mark the 14th notch. And these are like these notches, these are also marks you want to match up on your fabric when you're putting your pieces together. Another very common mark on a pattern is center front on fold, center back on fold, or on fold. On fold, like I said, means to cut on the fold. So line this edge up with the fold edge of your fabric and cut out, and it's going to be like a book-sized piece. not necessarily 2 pieces. Within a lot of bodices and a lot of other patterns, there is a waistline mark. You don't necessarily have to mark this onto your fabric, but it is ideal if you're fitting it onto someone or you're using a lot of tailoring tricks or there's a lot of detail and you're going to be trying it on, taking it off. Marking the waistline mark is very ideal. Going up to the middle of the information on the pattern, you will see what the pattern is, the number. The number is very important because it follows along your instructions on what pattern you're working on next, and it's very easy to keep track of your patterns with a number. This is the bodice front, this is number 2. The corsage deviant and some other different language terms for bodice front. These are other 2 markings you want to make. These are 2 other sentences that you want to especially stay close attention to, and that is fabric, cut 1 on fold. That means cut 1 of these on the fold. Not 2, not 3, not 4, cut 1. Same thing with the contrast fabric, cut 1 on fold. Most of the time, like this one right here, which is the underskirt back, it will just say cut 2, and that just means cut 2 out of the regular fabric. But when you're working with interfacings and contrast fabric, it will specifically say how many you're cutting and how you're cutting it. Right down here is the pattern company and the pattern number, if you ever lose this pattern, what it goes to. Last but not least is when you are cutting out your pattern and you have your specific dress size or size that you're working with, make sure you cut out on the lines given to whichever size it is. I know it's hard to read and hard to pay attention to, but cutting out on the line that is given to you per whatever dress size that you have is important. You can also transfer this pattern onto paper instead of cutting it out specifically out of this mishigas of a tissue paper. You can do that using a tracing wheel and basically putting newsprint or paper underneath of this and following along the lines of the cut line for you onto that pattern. So you don't necessarily have to cut it out of here and use this for the transfer onto the other fabric. Another specific pattern marking that I want to show you guys is the grain line. This is extremely important. When you are cutting on the fold, you're automatically cutting on the grain line because the grain line is the parallel, basically the grain line is how the fabric is made, how the fibers are woven. You want to pay attention to the grain line mark as it needs to be parallel to the salvage edge of your fabric. That means the fabric edge that is freeing usually, or there's salvage edge markings on the end of your fabric. So as long as the grain line is parallel to that salvage edge, you're cutting your fabric on the right direction of the fabric itself. If you cut it crooked, or if you cut it the opposite way or perpendicular to the salvage edge, your garment is not going to hang and look right. I promise you, grain line is something you want to pay attention to. And almost on every single pattern besides the cut on fold ones, there is a grain line arrow marking that you want to pay attention to. That was a mouthful. Patterning is difficult, and reading patterns takes a long time to really feel comfortable with the pattern itself. Sorry for the length of the video, I knew it was a little long, but you kind of needed it all to be said within this video. If you guys have any questions about simple pattern reading and understanding what certain notches and certain words are, feel free to ask me below in the comments. I'll be glad to help. With patterning, be patient. That's the first thing that I tell everybody when learning patterning or learning basic sewing, more or less. Be patient with yourself. You will get the knowledge, it will come easier to you once you do more and you practice more. But that's it for this week. Don't forget to follow me on all my social medias, and I'll see you all next week. Bye!